All right, so we're going to start off here by talking about Italian Renaissance humanism. Okay, and humanism is based on the study of the classics, the literature of ancient Rome and Greece. And it also kind of, you see it in the name, it has to do with the importance of humans. We remember that during the medieval period, really everything was about the church. Okay, all the literature, all the art, um, all of society was geared around the church. The church was maybe the most stable organization in Europe. Um, and kings oftentimes had to bow down to the church. And what we're finding here is that during the Renaissance, we start to see the importance of humans again um, in society. And we can see this in the writings. We're going to later see this tomorrow. We'll talk about the importance of humans in art. And oftentimes we're going to find that the art of the period reflects the values of the period, right? So in the Middle Ages, well, we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but just remember that the art of the period reflects the values of the period. Humanists wanted to use classical values to revitalize their culture. They wanted to go back to the ideals of the Romans and the Greeks. They thought they had great empires back then. They had great achievements and great advancements. We should use them as a model, and they do. They believed intellectuals had a duty to live an active civil life and to study the humanities as to state's service, to better the state, to do what's right for the city-state. Really, and again, we're talking like Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome. So they would say, you know, if you're an intellectual, if you're a scholar, you should be out there trying to spread your knowledge, trying to better your city. That's kind of an obligation if you're one of the few scholars back then, understanding that in order to study back then, you had to know Latin. Now, Latin wasn't spoken in the empire. Latin was a dead language. It was the language of the Roman Empire. And although there were Latin-based languages like Italian, French, Spanish, even parts of English, in Germany, they spoke German, which is not Latin-based. But English is half German, half Latin. This education, the books, the readings of that period were all in Latin, in a dead language. So if you wanted to read, if you wanted to study, not only did you have to learn how to read, but then you had to also learn a different language. So very few people could read. And those who could, the humanist beliefs had a responsibility to help their cities, to engage in public life. They talk about a guy named Petrarch, Francesco Petrarch. He's considered the father of Italian humanism, and he changes his life. I believe the story is that he like went on a hike to a mountain at one point, and when he gets to the top of the mountain, he sees like the beautiful nature, and it inspires him, and it makes him say like humans can do anything, right? Within the human being is the capability, the capacities to do anything, to be successful, to eventually understand and control nature. So Petrarch is the kind of the father of humanism. And then we talk about vernacular literature, which is books written in the language of the people. Okay, so we say most old books in the Middle Ages were in Latin, and now we're going to start to see books coming out in the language of the people. One of these books was Dante's Divine Comedy. It was about a soul going into heaven. There was another book by a guy named, was an Englishman. Not Don Quixote. It was the story of a knight and his travels, right? And oftentimes in these books, well, first off, it opened the door for people to read in their own language. But secondly, as we look back at these books, the stories are interesting, but it also we can learn a lot about the surrounding culture, right? Like, I mean, think about it. If you saw a movie, an English movie or an American movie from this period, right? The movie might be interesting, but what also would be interesting is, oh wow, look what houses looked like back then, or look what cars looked like back then, or look what did phones look like back then, or what did computers, or in 100 years from now, when people look back at a lot of our literature, or we have movies now, which are kind of our modern storytelling, um, half of it will be interested in the story, but the other half will probably be interested in just um, the culture around the story. And that's what we can glean from a lot of these vernacular literatures, from Dante, from, gosh, I'm upset with myself, I can't remember the name of that English book about Canterbury's Tales, maybe, um, is that the journey of this man and his experiences through England. Um, a lot of what we learn is also just the culture around the story. Um, so